Brilliant. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Fantastic. Well, my name is Amatey Doku. I am the Deputy President of the National Union of Students, leading on our Brexit work and a proud supporter of For Our Future's Sake. And really, as this country enters the constitutional war of our lifetimes, we're looking for some really sharp analysis and scoop of interpretation. This weekend presents a small but crucial hiatus before we plough headlong into the meaningful vote next week, and what a week that will shape out to be. On one level, Theresa May's options appear to have completely closed down, but the government seems willing to do anything in its power to try and get this dodgy deal through. Is it still possible that we could still secure the votes for her deal? Has that likelihood increased or decreased over the last couple of days? And what exactly happens if she doesn't win? What are our options? What does her plan B involve? We've seen this week with some backbench amendments that Parliament has tried to take back control of the process. But what does that mean? And what are the options available to those who oppose the deal? Where could this lead? Are we looking at the revocation of Article 50? Are we looking at the people's vote or a general election? Well, with me to chew over all of this today, I'm delighted to be joined by a distinguished panel: Eloise Todd, CEO for Best for Britain, Tom Baldwin from the People's Vote campaign, and Dunt from politics.co.uk. What we'll try and do today is take some contributions from our panelists today and then open the floor to questions. There's definitely a lot to talk about, and with not a great deal amount of time, so I encourage panelists and audience members to keep their contributions as pithy as possible so we can get to as many of you as possible. But I want to start with you, Tom, and really ask, how did we get here and what happens next? Big question, but, but let's see if we can give it a shot.
Thanks for that. Look, 6 months ago, talking about a people's vote was, in polite society, regarded as perhaps sort of the wrong side of eccentric. And now, maybe, we could end up on the right side of history. Now, we've got that far for 3 reasons. One, we've really ridden our luck. And we're going to need to continue to ride our luck because we're going into a tornado, and it's going to throw up the pieces of politics, it's going to throw up everything, and we don't know how they're going to land. Second reason is the incompetence of our opponents. And we can't rely on them remaining incompetent and rubbish. And there's signs that they're beginning to crank up. The lie machine of leave is cranking up. We're going to hear about this whole, the immigration scares again, the refugee scares. We'll see all that again as we get closer to our objective. But we can't really do much about luck, and we can't do much about our opponents, so you can argue with them. But the thing we can do something about is the third reason why we've got to where we are, which is generally, not always, but generally, we've done the right thing. And so the question is really, what's the right thing that we've got to do now? And the first thing we've got to do is we've got to beat this deal. And we're not just got to beat this deal. It's not a shoo-in. If she's defeated in the House of Commons next week, there'll be many attempts to sit up in the coffin afterwards. There'll be other forms of Brexit which will surface and which will have to be knocked down. And our best strategy is to be the last thing standing. If we can clear the table of all these other forms of other ways forward, we can say we're the only way forward. And we've just put up some ads in Westminster Tube Station, which is very satisfying if you go there, because you can see Tory MPs and Brexiteers having to go through the machine, say, the only way forward, people's vote. We've got people there photographing. We've actually got someone in Westminster Tube, I hope, if they've done what I asked anyway, trying to get Jacob Rees-Mogg going through this ticket barrier today. So, yeah. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to turn the heat up a little bit on the Labour Party. Now, that's my party. And it's got to be done in the right way, by the right people at the right time. But, you know, Jeremy Corbyn and the Shadow Cabinet need to know that if they enable Brexit, this will be their Brexit as much as the Conservative parties. It will be hung around their neck. And their voters, their members, will not forgive them for not following their values. And the final thing we've got to do is we've got to address our negatives. And you hear it over and over again, you know, we had a referendum, you know, it's not democratic. It's really important that we say this is not the same referendum. We're campaigning for a different referendum about a different Britain, as Caroline was talking about, and a different Europe. We've got to emphasize this is a new vote with a new proposition, because in the last referendum, one of the reasons we lost, it was a real thing up against a unicorn. Brexit was like a kind of abstract, yeah, it was going to cure impetigo, baldness, make me more attractive, right? We now know what Brexit is. And when you put a specific option for Brexit up against staying in the European Union, people go, no, that's not what I want. And so we've got to make sure that this is a different referendum. We've got to make sure that we are insurgent, we are talking about change, that we have recognized that Leave voters were right in wanting to kick the establishment, and we must never look like the establishment again. We've also got to recognize that a referendum has its drawbacks. We shouldn't be jumping up and down with joy at the idea that, yeah, we're going to have another referendum on Europe. It's a really tough call. And I think sometimes like we can sound sort of too evangelical about, you know, the idea of another referendum. Look, the last one was grim. And this one will be very tough too. But it's the least worst option in these circumstances. It is the only way forward. But I do think we have to sort of acknowledge a little bit more the concerns of people who are worried about what a referendum might be. And that takes me to the third thing that is, you know, the negative that we get, that a people's vote, a new referendum, will be divisive. And, you know, the truth is, we do live in a very bitter and divided country. But I tell you what, I'd rather live in a bitter, divided country inside Europe than outside Europe. And we're not going to tackle the divisions in our society by making it poorer. And we're not going to tackle the rise of the far right and fascism with less democracy. The answer to them has always been more democracy, and that's why we need the vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Tom. And backstage, actually, we were talking about how one of the things that Brexit does to you is completely disrupts any sense of space or time, and a week can feel like you know, a year in a sense. So I kind of want to go to you, Eloise, and say, has anything really changed this week? It's been quite a long week. It started off with the 50K traffic jam, but has anything actually changed heading into next week?
I was reflecting on the fact that the fake virtual reality lorry jam feels like that was about a month ago, but it was actually Monday morning, so I was just checking that fact. So what has changed this week? There's a few things. I think one of the most important things, those two victories in Parliament, the Yvette Cooper Amendment and the Dominic Grieve Amendment, and what that shows is we have the majority, a potential majority that we need to build on to win that crucial vote when it comes on a people's vote. First of all, as Tom said, it's all about next Tuesday. We can't be complacent about voting down Theresa May's deal. We know she's inviting everybody in from all sides to have a word with them to try and peel them off. So we've got to be absolutely ready for that. But we also have to be ready to leap very quickly and ready to win that vote whenever it comes. And as Tom said, I absolutely endorse that. The best chance we have is to see off every other competitor, every other style of Brexit, and be the last thing standing that every single force in Parliament can gather behind. And I think what else has changed this week is the debate is moving on. thanks in no small part to the brilliant Caroline who just spoke this morning. She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. We have to do it differently. Look at Ireland. They managed to talk about abortion, for crying out loud, and a campaign in one of the most Catholic countries shifting the social views and doing it in a way that didn't split the country, but got people into a sensible, heartfelt debate about what's best for the country. And we need deliberative democracy, not only towards a referendum, but after it too. And whatever the result of that, we need to have those kind of citizens' assemblies that say, if we win the referendum, if we get a referendum and if we would win it, and we've still got a lot of work to do, but if that would happen, we then have an opportunity to say to people, so what do you want from you? What do you want from our relationship? Let's build that together and have everybody involved. And if we weren't so lucky and something, we weren't to lose it, then let's also use that deliberative process to work out what the future would be for the country, either way. Because actually, the public have been completely locked out of this process since June 2016. And it turns out, so have the Labour Party, so have the unions, and so have most other people in Parliament. And there's Theresa May frantically going, does anybody have the number of the unions? Back in number 10. And I'm not sure she's asked anyone for Keir's number, but I'm sure it'd be willingly given. So there they are, doing their last-minute shuttle diplomacy. It's January the 11th, 2019, and the clock is ticking. But, we've also moved on. What's changed this week is, look at this room, for example. Thank you to the organisers of this, put together in a flurry over Christmas. But look at the passion, look at the army, look at the people around the country that are willing to stand up for what they believe in. And it is so important now that we are humble in this approach. And I totally endorse what Tom said. It is the least worst option. In 2016, that campaign was lost, and it didn't have to be inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, and we know that there are things that we can do better, and we are organized, we are galvanized, and we have to forgive ourselves for some unfortunate Westminster focus for a few weeks while all of that goes into place. But that needs everybody around the country. It needs all your family and friends and connections around the country fighting as hard as they can. My dad, who is now in the Hull and East Yorkshire European movement, doing great guns. I can hardly get hold of him because he's, sorry Eloise, I'm leafleting. Sorry about that. He went and challenged Tim Martin in Wetherspoons and gave me a full update. Bless him. So yeah, coming soon, Alan Todd. He's going to kill me for mentioning that. He's going to kill me. Delete that. So everything is changing rapidly in Parliament, around the country. We're organised and galvanised, and we have to approach this with passion, but with humility, and we have to make sure we do it right. So together we can, and that's where I think we are this week.
Fantastic. Ian, I want to come to you, because I think we did see a slight shift in tone from the Labour Party earlier this week, from Keir Starmer saying it seems unlikely that we'll be leaving on March the 29th, and sort of an extension of Article 50 looks inevitable. Now that's still a sort of fluid position that they're taking, but I just wanted to ask you what you thought the various options might be available to Parliament, if you could look into your crystal ball and potentially look at the different possibilities for how this might play out.
Yeah, the thing that needs to change is basically May's deal needs to die. And once it dies, you recalibrate and you have a new reality around which MPs can start thinking. Because at the moment, there's no majority for anything at all. There isn't a majority in the Commons for a people's vote at all. There's no majority for Norway. But I think Norway, as a valid proposal now, kind of dies, at least for the time being, alongside May's deal, because it requires a withdrawal agreement. And the withdrawal agreement would require the backstop. And anything with the backstop now cannot pass the Commons. So in a way, that doesn't really have a chance either. You suddenly get stripped down, after May's deal is defeated, really, into the only two tenable options become people's vote and no deal. And then the fight has to begin about how that takes place. This week was important because it was almost historically important, really. And to sort of like think about why that is, you kind of have to, it's actually worth talking about what sovereignty actually is, which we've talked about a lot, but then no one actually ever talks about what it actually entails, right? Sovereignty is legitimate political power. And for most of human history, you know, most of sort of 2,000 years, that was just the king. That was what that was. Then in sort of 1600s, you get people overthrowing kings, and they say, well, then surely it means the people. But every time, if you look at the English Civil War, if you look at the French Revolution, the will of the people was the dominant idea of sovereignty. The first thing you got was totalitarian rulers coming in, saying, I represent the people, now you do what I think. In our country, it was Cromwell, who took it, eradicated all democracy, started locking people up for having sex, probably a bit more extreme than what Theresa May would do, but not necessarily that much. You know, in France, they were less fortunate. It was Robespierre who just drowned the country in blood. You know, and that sounds hysterical as a comparison. The will of the people always, always ends with overmighty government, because there is always a government that is prepared to stand there and go, well, I represent the will of the people. And then what the government has done in a more sort of pedestrian, prosaic way over the last 2 years is basically that. It has sat there and just demeaned Parliament, ignored Parliament, undermined Parliament, sidestepped Parliament. They don't even turn up to opposition day motions. They stuff legislation full of statutory instruments, which basically allows ministers to do whatever the hell they damn well please. Over and over again, they try to deny votes on Article 50. They just have treated Parliament like dirt. And that reached a sort of crescendo at the end of last year, where Theresa May obviously brings, you know, this thing forward. She brings her deal forward. She puts down a business motion on it, goes, only we can amend this. Then she gets rid of the vote and doesn't even bother to hold a vote on whether she can move her vote. Okay? And at that point, you see John Bercow stood there. John Bercow, who is a genuinely impartial speaker in every way, except for the one way that he must be partial, which is that he stands up for Parliament. And he says, you can see the video as he says to her, this is not an appropriate way for you to behave. Okay? We've had hundreds of MPs speak in this debate. It's been 5 days that we've been sat here doing it. You've told everyone this is going to take place. Now, if it's not going to take place, you should hold a vote on that. You should not just use this really underhand mechanism of having a minister by sort of fiat just sort of stand there and go tomorrow, and now it's not happening anymore. She never takes the path of parliamentary scrutiny. She did not take it then. And this week, Speaker of the House of Commons, in a way that sort of lives up to what William Lenthal did at the beginning of the Civil War when he stood up to the king, sort of said, okay, fine. If you're going to be underhand over here, then I don't really have to stick to the rule book over here either, okay? And therefore, I'm going to start handing out amendments. Now, the content of the amendments this week wasn't that particularly striking. I think Yvette Cooper's one. She's completely marvelous. She is basically like my personal, mythical, fictional society version of what the leader of the opposition should be. But the content of that amendment, I don't really get. I don't really understand why. If you really were going towards no deal, why you would stop the government using tax-raising powers doesn't make any sense, because you would be trying to desperately limit the damage. So I think in practical terms, it won't really add up to much. The Dominic Greaves stuff, it shortens the timetable considerably. I suspect the government would have come relatively quickly anyway. The content doesn't really matter. What matters is the vehicle. And the vehicle is Parliament, not the government. Parliament. And by allowing that amendment, you now have Parliament that is standing up for itself, that is saying, right, well, we're going to put forward alternatives. The point that we're at right now, none of those alternatives work. If MPs say we want to extend Article 50, but they don't have an idea of what they want to do with that, I suspect that the European Union would say no to that. Because it's like, well, we're not just going to take more time for you guys to continue having an emotional breakdown. There has to be a positive idea. And obviously, I want that to be another referendum. The moment after that deal dies is when the fight is on to try and get, what, really 100 MPs? I mean, you guys are better on this, so probably 100 MPs, 150 more MPs on side with that. I think many of them will go instantly, others will need work, and that's where the fight will be really in the next few weeks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And I have to say, for me, one of the biggest ironies this week was seeing seeing Andrew Lessam stand up at the dispatch box and ask John Bercow to publish his advice in full, which I just thought comedy is well and truly dead. We've got some time for some very, very quick questions. I'm going to ask you to perhaps undertake one of your biggest challenges ever as an audience, which is to ask a single sentence question with a question mark at the end of it, and leave the comments for lunch. So can I just have a couple of quick, yes, this gentleman here, I'm going to take them in rounds of 3. How do we keep no deal off the ballot paper in a referendum? The woman right here.
One option could be a cross-party motion requiring the government to
Sorry, there's a mic, just no worries, thank you.
One option could be a cross-party motion requiring the government to simply revoke Article 50. Could we discuss that?
Fantastic, thank you. And the gentleman here on the front row. This gentleman, sorry, behind you. Yeah, right.
Do you think we're all capable of healing after this process is over?
Fantastic.
Can the country come back together and be friends together?
Fantastic. So we've got no deal, revoking Article 50, and whether or not we can heal. Eloise.
Yeah, on no deal, I think our focus has to be voting down the deal, securing a referendum, and fighting for the option, making sure the option to remain is on there. What that would be up against, I think there are several ways in which to do it, several different cascades that you could do. But I think between the Electoral Commission, who will have very strong views from their perspective about how to put the question, and Parliament, and how that sort of plays out on the Leave, between the Leave MPs in particular, that would get sorted out there. But I think that as long as Remain is on the ballot paper, that is our focus if we indeed secure a referendum, if we indeed vote down the deal next week.
Fantastic. Tom.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think the one thing that's certain to be on a ballot paper is Remain, because it is the most popular option now. And the question of the question is one which is going to go around for a little while, I think. Some things are becoming clearer. It does have to be a specific option to leave the European Union. It can't be another, abstract, like I was saying earlier. Personally, I don't believe there's a majority in the House of Commons for no deal being on a ballot paper. Now, that may be tested, the Electoral Commission may have views on that. But I think we can sort of spend hours and hours and hours talking about what might be on a ballot paper. As somebody said to the other day, Sam Gingo, she said, you've got to catch your hair first, right? We've got to win this campaign for a people's vote before we start talking about, what's going to be in a ballot paper, what's going to be a designated campaign, how long the campaign's going to be. I mean, we're in danger of putting the cart before the horse. On the question of healing, I think it's this argument's not going to end. I mean, one of the reasons why David Cameron called the referendum, or so he said, was because he wanted a referendum to settle the question forever. Right? Yeah. I mean, how's it going, Dave? Yeah. I mean, it's right that this argument should continue. And I think the challenge for our side is, if we get a people's vote, and if we win a campaign then to stay in the European Union, our challenge is to show that our membership of the European Union can work, that we can address the grievances of 2016, that we can tackle some of the divisions in our society. And if we don't, then frankly, we will have failed, and people will be pushing for another referendum. So our challenge is to, 2016's got to be seen as a pivot point in British history, come what may. We've got to respect 2016 in saying that this was the moment our country began to change. And our challenge is to show that we can change it.
Ian, very quickly.
I mean, very briefly, I don't think we should ever, you can't revoke Article 50 without having another referendum, to my mind, and that seems I think that's dangerous, and we can't go by it that way. What was created by a referendum has to be stopped by a referendum. Let's face it, they are so obviously and demonstrably a shit idea. Everyone knows that now, but it just has to be done. That's the game that we're in right now, and it's got to be closed off in that way. In terms of the healing, I mean, that's going to take a really long time.
I'm just going to take one more round of questions because we do have to move on to the next session. Can I take the person just... Yes, thank you.
This is particularly for Tom. I'm a Labour Party member. I was one of the people in the meeting at the party conference who came up with the wishy-washy policy with the options on the table, which many of us in the room agreed to in the end. Thousands and thousands of members are writing to Jeremy Corbyn all of the time. I mean, the only Brexit dividend is for the Royal Mail with all the extra post. What else can we do? I mean, I wrote to him again yesterday. I've written to him on behalf of all these delegates. You know, yes, huge numbers of people in the Labour Party, all of the groups in the Labour Party of the Labour for People's Vote, Another Europe is Possible, Remain Labour. There's huge groups of us working so hard on this. We're feeling very betrayed by what's the leadership not going along with what the policy actually is. So I'd like some more hints on what else we should be doing.
Fantastic. So what more can we do to put pressure on the Labour leadership? The gentleman just at the back there.
I'd just like to ask... Sorry, yeah. You've told us to write to our MPs. We've been doing that. It's working quite well. The MPs are actually rising to the challenge. I want to know what else the route and file the rest of us can do here. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be taking more radical action, like non-violent direct action, like the climate change protesters are doing. I don't think people take much notice. We can't just go on writing to our MPs. It's not going to have effect. Is there anything else more radical that all of us can do?
So should we occupy Parliament? The woman just at the back waving there.
Thank you very much for recognising those of us in the back over here. I'd like to ask when the leadership of the People's Vote campaign is going to recognise and address the core injustice of the referendum, which was that not all residents in Britain could vote, and not all British citizens could vote. So, I'm an Indian citizen living in the UK, and I could vote, and I did. I voted Remain. My brother-in-law, who's a British citizen living in Brussels, couldn't vote. That's an injustice, and we must address it, and I don't find that any of the leadership is doing so. Please do so.
Brilliant, thank you. So very, very quickly, because we're running out of time, we've got a question about the Labour leadership, we've got a question about what more radical action we should we take, and a question about the franchise of the electorate. Tom.
On the question on Labour leadership, I just want to say what you're doing is working. I was told yesterday by a reliable source that the Labour Party has received no less than 13,000 pieces of correspondence in the last few weeks, and that's been down to the efforts of people here and elsewhere. That's fantastic, and that's more than they got on Iraq and Clause 4 combined. Right? And that has an effect, I promise you, in politics. It is, they are overwhelmed by, they're hearing your voice and just keep going, right? The most effective thing we can do is work for the membership, work for the trade unions, show where the Labour voters are, because, it does matter to them. On the question about the changing the franchise, I think I've got enormous sympathy for this. I've got enormous sympathy for votes for 16-year-olds too. I mean, we had it in Scotland. Why can't we have it here? I've just got to say this though: that if we're going to get this referendum, if we're going to overcome all the obstacles in our way, and they are many, I don't want to start, trying to reinvent the law about the franchise or introducing new voting systems unless we have to. Because, you know, there are going to be people trying to trip us up in every way possible. And I think, you know, John Kerr's report on the pathway to the people's vote recommended that the principles of speed, simplicity, and clarity are followed at all times, and I do think that's important. Now, you know, if we can get votes for British nationals living in the EU, if we can get votes for 16-year-olds, and there's parliamentary consensus for that, you won't find anyone more enthusiastic about that than me. If it looks like a major hurdle to us getting a referendum, well, frankly, I'd rather have a referendum.
Ian, just very briefly.
On the direct action thing, I don't know, I wear pocket squares, so I'm not really very good for that sort of stuff. I kind of think that, I suspect that the way to approach this is more about the manner in which you do arguments, and I think that's what's going to win it. At the moment, it is just a Westminster thing. That's the irony of it. It is in Westminster, and it will be until something gets authorized, until there is actually a campaign. And then I think the question that we need to ask is, how do we fight? How do you argue? How do you convince? And for ages, especially the sort of the left and liberals, just went into this sort of like evidence-based, only evidence counts, as this and this, so can't you see the facts, and then we're done. I do it myself all the time, I'm terrible for it. In fact, there is no mutual incompatibility between emotions and evidence, between passion and reason. And the left liberals need to be able to talk in those terms, because that's how the other side is talking. Just feelings, feelings, feelings. And the feelings that they're talking about, Caroline Lucas did a very good job of talking about it earlier this morning, are not the wrong feelings. They've just managed to funnel that in to this completely toxic, poisonous, reactionary vehicle. Okay? So our vehicles are better. And we can take that fight. And I would, rather than stuff around, you know, sort of direct action stuff, my main thing is just about how do we argue? How do we argue effectively? Online, on Facebook, with your dreadful racist uncle. You know, online, in real life, in the office, all the time, making the fight and making a case, making it, yes, always, with reason and evidence, but always, always, always with passion and commitment. That seems to me to be the way to go.
Thank you. And finally, Eloise, last word.
Just very quickly, on the Labour question, there are motions going through CLPs requesting that the Labour Party have as their position, if there were to be a general election, that they would support both a referendum and staying in the EU. So if you are a Labour Party member, get down your CLP, make sure that's happening there, and if not, make it happen. And Another Europe is Possible is doing a lot of work around that. So that's a very practical and highly impactful thing that you can do. I would agree with Ian on the activity and really honing the way in which you talk to people. Direct action, it might come to that if it's, you know, if it's like 29th of March and it's 10 p.m. I'll be there chained somewhere, I'm not quite sure where. But yeah, heaven forbid, not sure. But I think for the moment, it's not only about the content and what you say, it's also the respect. I think the sort of finger wagging, let me tell you, you know, just all my, there's about the manner and the tone. And when I had my sort of best conversation with one of my mates that I grew up with who voted Leave, it was all, we just listened to each other. And of course, it was a different context because we care deeply about each other. And I'm sure if I'm sitting with Tim Martin, I'm not going to quite have the same vibe. But you've got to kind of force yourself to listen and engage on where they are, not where you want them to be. So I think that's super important. And on the franchise, I agree with everything Tom said. We do at Best for Britain have a petition in conjunction with the 3 million British in Europe, where we're trying to build numbers to show that. But I absolutely endorse what Tom said about not making that a kind of condition. Not because we don't want it, but because there are many, many hurdles along the way. But let's get those numbers up, because if they become astonishing, anything is possible. So thank you all for everything you do, and it is working. Keep writing, get other people to write, door knocking and spreading the word. That's the best thing you can do.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank I'd like to thank Eloise, Tom, and Ian for that insightful conversation. I'm sure we could have gone on for a lot longer, but we've got a packed agenda today. All I'd say is that I don't think Theresa May would be able to assemble this number of people for her deal, and it's vitally important. One final thing, because I do think we've got a really strong chance of this, but one final thing, it's really important that the voices of young people and students are heard right through this, because this is about their futures. But thank you, and thanks to the panel.